Hello, everybody, and welcome to our first episode of the Third Grade Awakening, a new podcast where we like to talk about controversial issues and modern political, social, economic issues, as well as historic ones and how they relate. Now, before we really get started, I just want to quickly introduce who we are. We are all students in AP U.S. History, and our teacher is Mr. Janicek, and he probably has a few things to say.
Oh, well, guys, I just have enjoyed this. This is about the probably fourth year that a volunteer group has come in to discuss big issues. We called it Philosophy Club for a long time, and I think it's a nice way to get in an educational environment and talk about things that matter, talk about things that are meaningful to you guys, but at times, sometimes things that can be controversial, like you said, and things that are at times in the challenges of the system that we're in public education in particular, and the political climate of today, that become more difficult to talk about, and this environment might help us still explore those ideas. So I've enjoyed running that for the kids that volunteer, and this is a total volunteer thing. You don't get any varsity letters for being here, you don't get any pins, and you don't get any recognition. But hopefully what we get out of it is a little better discussion and clarity, and talking about the issues and figuring out what the right course of action might be. So I appreciate you guys.
So why don't we introduce everyone else here. I'm Justin, and I definitely don't always have the most popular views when it comes to politics. I definitely do side on more conservatively on most issues. So I think this is a good environment for me to be able to talk more openly about my beliefs.
My name is David. More generally, in terms of, I suppose, politics, a spectator, I'm not exactly going to be the type of person to be actively pestering and poking people on their thoughts, but nonetheless, I am quite open to discussion. I do enjoy the opinions of others. However, in terms of politics, I might not be exactly as informed or descriptive as some of us here are.
Well, I've seen you for most of the year. You're one of the most informed young people that you see. So don't sell yourself short.
But like current day politics, I haven't been exactly I don't know.
Well,
up to
hopefully
date.
it's because you're a little busy doing schoolwork. But
Yeah.
but you keep your ear down, and as a lot of you guys do, to the modern issues, and you want to be aware of what variables are creating the climate that we're in.
My name is Hoy, and I just enjoy having these discussions about controversial topics and issues. And I mean, like David, I don't know a lot of politics, modern politics, but I just want to put my voice out there and just absorb in what others have to say.
I'm Nate. I try to stay a little bit even on both planes, in the past and the present with politics. So I may bring up some stuff from the present to relate, but I'm here to learn more about the past and more about the present that I probably don't know.
Okay, and one more thing before we get in today's main topic. Just a thing about the name. It may sound religious when we say the Third Great Awakening, but you just want to clarify that this is a knowledge awakening, whereas the First and Second Great Awakening were mainly huge movements inspired by religion. We're trying to create a movement inspired by knowledge and informed people. So now let's talk about the State of the Union, which is actually later tonight. So I'll go to Mr. Janicek and see what he's expecting out of it.
Well, to synthesize both those things you just brought up to start today, you brought up the concept of our group name as a Third Great Awakening. I agree with you that we're trying to have a knowledge awakening, and as a history teacher, one of those challenges that we that we see is discussing these concepts in class and linking them back to the historic reality and circumstances that surrounded it. And as you mentioned, the first and second Great Awakening were religious revivals that tried to encourage religious thought and conviction and living the gospels out by people's lives, and how that was going to eventually turn itself into a lot of the reform movements of United States history, which is all true. And yet it seems that religious discussion in the context of a public education system is something that is a little bit frowned upon or potentially misinterpreted by more of a secular society, even though we have, for the first, after 1636 and Harvard gets founded, all of the universities in the Ivy League and on the East Coast, and for most of the United States history until the Gilded Age, mostly, the students that are in colleges were religious majors, theological studies. So it's an interesting thing to sit there and look inside the religious scriptures of any faith and try to pull out religious dialogue and usually value judgments, good, evil, what's good, what's bad, to what extent is something good or bad, and then negotiating and discussing what those might be. So that's a variable, but I would agree that in today's world, we almost need to make sure people aren't thinking we're being religious, because we can't be religious anymore. And even though that doesn't even make sense to say, that's kind of the feeling that I think American students might feel. I know certain American teachers will feel that way. It's very difficult to talk about those complicated issues, even though that's all they talked about for the first 150 years of the country, or 200 years, however you want to look at it, in academia. You know, it's one of those interesting things. And then today's knowledge. So, are we transitioning into the election cycle or the State of the Union tonight then?
Wait, let me mention something here,
Yeah.
since we're still on the topic of the first Great Awakening, or the second one as well.
Or hopefully our third one.
Right. Obviously, the idea of an awakening is that it's a state of sleep beforehand, right? That there's something going on that maybe misdirects or takes away focus from what at the time should have been religion and was a revival, therefore, because it was dead. Like, that's the main idea of the term. So I think nowadays, obviously in politics and with the State of the Union coming up, you can obviously argue that nowadays Americans are a little bit more misdirected, unfocused. You know, more people care about what porn star Trump, like, you know,
Whoa.
recently, right? Versus, right, what his plans are for the future or for the country, or obviously the budget, all that sort of stuff. And I think the greatest thing about the Third Great Awakening would probably be the fact that we can kind of let people come back onto that track, that sort of track of, hey, I should care more about, like, how this should, I guess, the things that affect me and the country, more than the things that affect, like, his reputation or who I'm going to vote for. Like, it's, you know, I think that would be a good thing to emphasize.
What does that take? That takes prioritizing, right? It takes prioritizing, and in the course of history that we've studied, whether we want to talk about Davy Crockett or we want to talk about Cleveland's election and focusing on wrong things, depending on what we want to talk about, the nation's attention often is going to be drawn to things that might be less significant. And how do you control the narrative or get the narrative back? You don't want to control the narrative, but you want to help the democracy, help them prioritize what might actually be in the best interest of most of the people.
But in the same sense, it can also be prioritized wrongly, because and here I'll bring it up, is that, like, obviously the second president to be impeached was Bill Clinton for primarily I'd say the Monica Lewinsky scandal, and in that sense, you know, it was something that was prioritized. Somebody saw that and went further than the statement, that's wrong, and even so, obviously taking him out of office, right? But I mean, like, there's different severity, levels of severity, and obviously, like, what should be important versus what's not. Like, I'm not trying to say that obviously such a scandal is not important. Obviously, it happened, shouldn't have happened, blah, blah, blah. But nonetheless, what did it deserve such, like, a consequence of that magnitude? I have no idea. And
Well, if you go back and we're looking at the foundation, if we look at who's impeached and the difference, do most Americans know there's a difference between being impeached and being removed from office? Two different things. So to be impeached means you're brought up on articles of impeachment, and the Senate will then vote after the House brings up the charges. And in the Clinton case, that was brought up on charges. The only illegal thing he did is lie. So perjury under oath when he was testifying about whatever he did with the
No sexual relations.
White House
were not-
intern, yes. And then they started to discuss the whatever happens outside the case there, the legality component is you lied under oath. And if you're willing to excuse lying under oath, in that case, even if it's about something we deem as insignificant, it's still lying under oath. So if you're under oath, you're supposed to tell the truth, right? And the irony in this is we started this discussion, you're supposed to put your hand on the Bible and swear you're gonna tell the truth. Well, it is kind of funny now that we're talking about the Third Great Awakening. So somehow the Bible's part of that, but you're supposed to tell the truth, but he didn't. Now are you supposed to hold them accountable for it? Now, is Clinton the first president to ever lie? I kind of doubt that.
No.
Have they held every single president or politician accountable for their lies and lying? I don't think so. So does that mean we shouldn't? Does that mean we shouldn't? Or under what circumstances should politicians be held accountable? You know.
I mean, in that case, no one really got hurt, so I honestly feel like, although he did lie under oath, this was like a personal matter. That's not exactly the kind of thing you want to talk about publicly. So I almost feel like he had the right to not lie, but definitely, that's like probably pretty embarrassing.
It's funny that you said nobody got hurt when I am sitting here, and the first thing that come to my mind when you say that is hashtag Monica Me Too. That's the first thing that come to my mind in the context of the modern stuff that's going on with the exposure of sexual harassment and all that.
Oh, yeah.
And the hashtag Me Too component is what that's about in today's modernism. And to suggest that nobody's hurt, Monica was probably hurt in that. I'm sure she kind of maybe felt pressured. You think?
Yeah.
You know, so it's like, to what extent are you supposed to, or can you hold people? John Kennedy had plenty of extramarital affairs. Franklin Roosevelt had plenty of extramarital affairs, lied about it. Everybody lies about it. I'm not saying every president has extramarital affairs, but several have. Several have abused their power.
Trump has had, what is it, like three?
3 wives and a recent incident.
Yeah.
But I'm gonna.
Thomas Jefferson had a relationship with his slave
Definitely.
and 4 children. But are we throwing away everything Thomas Jefferson ever did because of that complexity? I'm hoping not. But in today's climate, they're pulling down the Woodrow Wilson statues at Princeton because he believed in segregation, even though he was for democracy for the whole world. There's complexities. Obviously, we've talked about, or in class anyway, I've talked about the removal of Confederate monuments and statues as a component to the changing, perhaps, of history and debating that complex issue. Yeah, there's a lot of variables. So I don't know how that, I know how we can probably bring it back to tonight, but what are your thoughts, Justin?
Well, I definitely have to say, especially talking about like statues being torn down from people's views in the past and not aligning with today, that definitely, well, that doesn't seem right, because in the time period, most of those people that have statues, their views were maybe not the best, but fairly normal. And now we're trying to say that just because it doesn't match up with what we believe today, that just seems wrong to just take down monuments for that. And I think that this could work into the State of the Union tonight, because Trump has received backlash back when the Confederate monuments were being torn down in Charlottesville.
Yeah.
And he was basically, they said that he was siding with the white supremacists when he clearly said that there was people to blame on both sides. And that's what this has reminded me of.
Let me ask Hoy here, because I know you're somewhat of an interested man in racial and gender studies, obviously. What's your take on people judging past views from using their own, I guess, standards?
It's interesting to see the different viewpoint changes from modern era to back then, because with the segregation issue, back then, the majority of the American population, or especially the white folks, were against blacks, and now they're tearing down statues for segregation. So it's weird how I guess the majority just kind of changed their viewpoint and start a cult, so to speak, and just
Well, it
just
starts,
having their
doesn't it
thing.
start with the premise? And it's difficult because in our country, we want to be tolerant and need to be tolerant. We don't have to like everything everybody does or says, but the First Amendment protects freedom of speech and ideas and groups and whatnot. But you don't have to like what they, but at the same time, these people that were being immortalized as Confederate war heroes that are being immortalized did things that should be reprehensibly remembered as awful things. And so and be taught as such, which is a complex part of the issue. They were fighting for a system that maintained segregation. So clearly that needed to be fixed. But then you strip away the rest of the Civil War, and is it all about that issue? Yes and no, if we get into the deep part of it. But that depth of understanding and knowledge about the Civil War era in the context of modern day America, a lot of people don't want to engage in that aspect of states' rights versus federal power, and what are the merits to it, and what are the challenges in that. So it's complicated on both, and it requires a comprehensive understanding and more tolerance to just be able to talk about it, you know. So, but we're not in a very, you're right, it seems like there's at times some reverse intolerance. Even though the people that are, you know, the white supremacist group that makes it on TV all the time, even though they represent probably what likelihood of the American population, in your guys' estimation, are members of neo-Nazis, American...
2%.
Probably less than that, because that's 2%. That's like 2 in 100 people.
Right.
So
It's probably less than that.
a fraction of a percent.
You're talking of a likelihood of a fraction of a percent. But why do those guys make it on TV, you guys?
I think just the general common man wants drama and
Yep.
all that.
Yep, right. Doesn't it make sense? And television newscasts are gonna look for more ratings. They're not gonna put middle-of-the-road people in there to discuss these things. They're gonna put the extremists on there. Yeah, and that's part of our, I think, hopefully, in the big picture, that's gonna be part of our awakening, you know?
Well,
Yeah.
would you think this upcoming State of the Union is going to appeal to that sort of extremist sort of, not lovers, but like that sort of citizen, the people who want to see drama, want to see Trump say like weird or like, I don't know, like insane things?
Yes.
Or you think it's going to be a more logically sound, like here's what we hope is going to happen with America?
Well, what do I think it's going to be? I've watched every State of the Union that I can, no matter who's president, no matter what political party's in power, and I'm always hopeful that any of those State of the Union addresses give me a window into the personality of the person, but and what their convictions might be, to help me judge best what the policy choices might end up being. So I'm sure there's going to be moments tonight where the president sounds intellectual and economically driven and focused on facts and details. I'm sure of it. To what extent is he going to have all that knowledge accessible from himself, or does he have speechwriters? Every president's got their speechwriters. Obama had some of the greatest speechwriters, right? But he was also very good at delivering that message. The current president may gravitate toward appealing to his base a little bit with volatile rhetoric at times. And I don't know what's going to happen. Every time I watch a State of the Union, I'm hopeful that whatever the president says is going to be well received by both sides. But unfortunately, in the last 10 to 15 years of politics, no matter what any president says, it's not well received by the other side. And we seemingly have lost the ability to discuss those common values. And I'm hoping, again, with you guys, that this is part of that third great awakening. Like, what are some of those discussions going to lean toward as far as what the common values might be? You know?
Yeah. With tonight, you were saying speeches as well. I was thinking again about the debates between Trump and Clinton, and how he wasn't even really able to answer too many of the questions. So I was curious to ask you, do you think that he'll be able to stay on topic? Because most of the time, from seeing his campaign speeches, I don't think he's gone on stage with notes, or am I wrong?
Well, your first statement, you said something like you don't remember him being able to answer a question. And what I would say right back to you is, do you have any evidence? Can you give me one of the situations where he did it? Because, like, I feel like it's okay to challenge your assertion that he didn't answer any questions right now, because that's a big thing.
I feel like that when he was asked a question, like, he could have answered it, but I think his main goal was to avoid the questions and kind of go on his own. Because I think he interrupted Hillary to argue with her during, I don't know, maybe 3 times.
I would agree. But I would also look at any debate that's ever had, and the more you guys study your political stuff, you'll realize that politicians are going to answer the question that they wished has been asked of them, not the one that was actually asked. And that's not a unique situation to the President Trump. That's standard fare for most American politicians that are going to be successful. Now, I'm not saying it's good nor bad. I'm just saying to recognize that people are going to answer a question in a way that's still going to make their position sound acceptable to you.
I mean, I was watching the Democratic governor debates for Illinois, and most of them, I think 2 of them, like, what's his name, Biss, and they were avoiding the question. One of the questions was, what would be the most outstanding thing that you would have done if you were elected governor? I think Biss tried rerouting the question, and then, I don't know his name, but somebody else is like, my best improvement of the state would be splitting it into 3, with 3 governors by the city, the rural, and the suburbs. That's what he said.
Was he serious or being funny?
He was serious.
He was serious. So a 3-way secessionist movement in the state of Illinois to segregate us based on urban interests, suburban interests, and rural interests, with an inability to come to a table of discussion like ours and compromise what those common values are.
Yep.
I think it sounds like a friggin' ridiculous idea.
Yep.
Right. So that guy's not going to win.
But, I mean, it's funny, it's just... One of the people that is having all this campaign and everything, he avoided the question, but the more radical approach answered the question. And I'm pretty sure that Pritzker answered his questions too, so that's why I was...
Anytime you guys have more to say on any issue, whatever it is, and like when you make your claim, and I run into this challenge with students all the time, they make wild claims of hyperbolic nature with very little evidence to back up their claims. You know, the most common one that we'll see tonight, I'm sure, in the post-operative analysis of the Trump speech will be the president's a racist. That'll be one of the claims that is laid out there. Now, if you want to make that claim, then there better be some evidence to back up that claim. And you can probably at times use some of the president's words to insinuate by some of the things he said that he is. But that's still going to be a judgment call that individuals have to make for themselves. And they have to wrestle with the evidence of what that is and balance out immigration policy and what might be best for the country. And having a law, what should the parameters of that law be, and try to find that common ground of what we can agree on. And will that be part of the narrative and the discussion and the debate? I don't know. Based on current trends, I kind of doubt it. But I'm going to watch again and be hopeful that, because that's all we can do at this point, and help other people become informed about the layers of complexity of these issues. But I think I see a lot of young people gravitate toward whatever the news feed says on their iPhone is whatever claim they're going to make and let everybody know about. And the problem with that is we're a consumer of information without understanding who's providing us all of this information. Because our sources are so nebulous and so layered and so, there's so many sources of information. And I think I uploaded to the Schoology post, watching an hour, a half-hour long program on Fox News, and then I turned the channel and watched a half-hour program on CNN News. And the narratives of the story were 100% different. 100%. Not even, we're not negotiating 50%. I mean 100%. On Fox, it was the discussion of the surveillance and the Russia stuff is all a sham, and it's concocted by the Democrats, and it is a complete misguidance of truth. And then I turned on CNN and it said this is all a sham by the president and the administration to deflect from the investigation. And frankly, I don't know who's telling me the truth. I know, in all likelihood, neither one is being completely clean, but I will wait for the evidence to come out before I draw my final conclusion. But then I have to have faith that the system is going to tell me the truth. And then I run into another issue. Have they been doing well at telling me the truth on things that I want to have faith in? You know, and I go to the historical track record, and I'm not all that sure. If we wanted to get into those issues, we could, but confidence in the system is one of the awakening components I think you guys, we would all want, right? We want to be confident in our system that we can trust people in government. We kind of need to be able to trust them because we need laws. We need to execute laws. In what type of a way? I don't know, in a political way or in an equal, I mean, justice is supposed to be what? Blind. In this context of Russia, Trump, or Democrats manipulating the Russia-Trump, to what extent can we be certain that this final story we're going to get is going to be truthful? I'm hoping that it is, and I'm hoping the evidence is clear for all of us to consume, but I'm not even sure that that's going to happen.
Well, I'd say possibly the worst idea is that it's truthful, but somehow in a negative way. And I think, like, in my opinion, just from the little snippets of news that I've managed to watch over the years, I think it's pretty important, and the State of the Union is going to be a prime example, is that let's say the president gives a speech, as he will, on various topics, various matters, and his statements on what he might do about it, what America might do about it, what Congress, Supreme Court, something might do about it, right?
About the speech or the issues discussed?
Not the issues.
Yeah.
And then the response from, say, the other sides, in this case, can be the Democrats. If you're a Democrat, you turn on the Democratic response, and you listen to that, purely that, for your summary of the speech. They might pick out only lines that could be misinterpreted. They could pick out only the lines that make Trump look bad, to say the least. Because obviously, nowadays, you're not going to have people who's going to sit there for the whole duration, listening to everything. They're going to want little bits and pieces, right? And when you take out, like, small bits that are, you know, without context, maybe racist or sexist.
You said the key word.
Right.
People will take things out of context on purpose to manipulate a story and a situation to serve their interests. And the only way to fight that is genuine knowledge by the individuals that are consuming this information. I don't know if you'll ever get past, and I don't know if we ever have been in a situation where everybody has been honest and full of integrity all the time. We want to look for the people in our history that maybe that was representative of, people that were leaning more toward that direction. But the consumer of all this information really has a harder job today than they've ever had in American history because of the sources of information. And the irony is that the media today has been consolidated into, give or take, 5 to 10 corporations, depending on whether you're talking about television news or print news. And yet there's more sources of information, i.e. our podcast might be a source of information. And or somebody else's podcast, or the internet news. The alternative news sources have given rise to echo chambers for your own political point of view that you tend to lean toward. And if you tend to lean toward that point of view, then you're going to tune in to those people that support your point of view. And you might miss a legitimate argument presented by the other side. And in our system, we are a bipartisan system majority, so the other side will present facts which might exist or might be manipulated. And we have to say this is where that vocabulary of alternative facts has come into the modern era. And the fact that some stories have been proven to be false, either about the president or other issues and weapons of mass destruction or something like that. If things are later proven to be untrue and are going to be presented to us when we're supposed to consume them as facts, the media actually is supposed to have a very, very important job to sift through these facts before they deliver them to us. But in the market economy we're in, of news ratings and media, they often skip that process. And they put out the most controversial, volatile issues and splash those on television for all of us to consume as comprehensive truth. And it's not true.
But then the question is that should we be focusing on not fixing, I guess, but like repairing or maybe improving the media, or should it be the minds of the people, right? Because obviously, if somebody puts out a headline with some controversy about some ex-president, and somebody reads it and takes it for truth and base their whole view off of that headline, is it really going, although they're both at fault, who should we really be aiming for here to kind of,
I don't know, Justin, what do you think?
I'd definitely be saying that the media is the problem because, like, I remember a while ago, CNN, this is a while ago, but they had like a thing where they were talking about Trump getting like 2 scoops of ice cream at dinner, and then on like the little subtitles at the bottom of the screen, it was talking about a bunch of people dying. And it's not just CNN, it's both sides, because I was watching Fox News the other night, and instead of having like an important story on, they had a video of a dog bowling. And he wasn't even bowling, he just pushed a bowling ball down a slide, and that was on the news. So, that's the kind of thing that I'd expect to see on like maybe a Facebook page, but the news's job is not, it shouldn't be just to entertain, it should be to inform. And nowadays, the news has just become like a source of entertainment. People look at it to see like what's like funny things going on, to see the drama in the world. It's almost like when you tune into Fox News, it's almost like you're watching TMZ or something. It's like a bunch of like celebrity gossip, when its real purpose should be informing about world events and getting in as many facts and truths in as possible. Because you can never know you're getting the whole truth, but they can definitely be trying harder to inform us of everything.
Absolutely. They should definitely be trying harder. I mean, before I even had Jenna's class, I would take the news at face value. I wouldn't pick it apart. And now I can clearly see what is actually more factual than before. And the factual things are not always the heavy things. And yes, it's okay having a nice thing, but I mean, if that's your only thing on the news, that's not news anymore. You're right, it's TMZ with.
well, I'm gonna ask Hoy here what his take on this is, because in my personal opinion, I agree with Justin, I agree with Nate, but I think this could be a little over-exaggerated, obviously, because you're taking, I guess, like one clip of the news and saying like, oh, I can't believe it's all entertainment nowadays. And I don't mean to obviously be rude or whatever, but I feel like there is some form of information. It's just hidden behind a bunch of other, I suppose.
You know,
WikiLeaks.
you guys remember when we saw in class the Fox News excerpt from Judge Napolitano about telling you what ended up being the truth. It was so truthful that he got fired. So on the news, even in the television news, you're gonna run into moments where people will say things that are very truthful and very honest and full of integrity. And they might not even get fired by saying it, but in that particular case, that's what happened. And that reveals two things, right? That you might find those nuggets out there once in a while, but how do you know, right? How do you know if that person is being truthful? And if I go back to that day we watched it, he used an awful lot of evidence to make his point, and a lot of facts that were backing up claims. And that's basically what, in that particular argument, would make me empathize and support that particular guy in his quest for the truth. And maybe if somebody makes an argument that is full of cliches and not as much evidence, not logos appeals, but pathos appeals, we can all find the argument about how an illegal immigrant murdered somebody. And we can put that on TV, like Fox does at times, and try to discuss this issue of immigration through an illegal immigrant that killed somebody. And will that be something that muddies the water a little bit? Probably. To the same degree, if you lost a child due to a murder by an illegal immigrant, you'd probably be pretty upset about that, right? And you would say to yourself, if that person wasn't here legally, or wasn't here illegally, that might not have happened. And that would be a logical conclusion. So the question becomes, what do we do about that situation? Not to use it the way that the parties are using them. So that's the challenge of balance in the news stories. Do we have the intellectual ability to balance out the hyperpolarization of even the news? And this goes back to your question, David, about is it the individuals? Should we be trying to change the news or trying to change us? What do you think we might be more effective at?
With that being said, I want to bring it back to Emerson, where he said our foolish consistency is our biggest problem, and people will generally tend to stay with what they believed in the first place and not change from that. And so based on that, I think that we should try to fix the people in the public and try to make them more open-minded. But with that being said, I think the media is also at fault for kind of supplying the public with, distractions and fake stories and whatnot. So.
I've actually done a project. I'm doing a project for it right now for my APs in my class. Like our group decision is that, like, it's about tragedy, unification. Like, does it provide us unification? And our solution was like to prevent disunification during like tragic events. We need to control the media, like government control the media. That's what my group we decided about doing. Like, cause there's places like sometimes there's just satirical news people don't realize it's satirical, like The Onion, and sometimes there's like news networks that are just like completely biased. So where it'd be like CNN, BuzzFeed, Breitbart, InfoWars, groups like them. Like those are the kinds of groups that we in our group decided that we should regulate, and like we should check up on them so that the government can just give the simple, straight facts.
Oh, Omar.
You
know where I'm going.
I know you hate
Let's
that.
let him
but,
introduce himself.
But hey,
Yeah.
all right, Omar, hello. I was in a different.
And a guy that read 1984.
Yeah.
You've read
Yeah,
1984.
but you see, my group is the one who mostly is like. I'm just like, I see what they're talking about right there, like during times of like, say for 9/11, because
Yes.
it's probably like a great surge of Islamophobia in the United States after 9/11, due to like the vilification from the media, to some part, you know. Like that's like a big part that we're focusing on, whether it be like the media saying there must be a call to action, or like even in like class, like the corruption of media, like from like big businesses being bought out, to how like Zinn also like brought that up during like the Gilded Age, how in the election of 1896, the businesses knew that they were probably going to lose if they didn't do something, and so they kept on funding those newspapers to release daily issues instead of weekly issues, as they talk about.
Well, they were given dailies before that, but you're right, they were going to be financing, backing stories that they were paying for, yes, and they were attempting to manipulate the outcome of an election. And it wasn't Russian conspiracy back then or inside Democratic conspiracy, it was corporate conspiracy that was attempting to manipulate the election of 1896, and they successfully did it. And the regulation of the free speech component that you're speaking of is the part that scares me a lot, but at the same time, the citizens, we have free speech, we shouldn't be
Using it.
You're correct, that's a great point. People with that power should respect that power, that's a great point. But how do we do that? Because do you want the government to regulate it? If they regulate it, this is the same government that had lied to me about weapons of mass destruction. This is the same government that lied to me about Vietnam. And this is the same government that's lied to me on several occasions. And I'm not even done listing all the ones, you know, like, and that have been provenly times where they're not telling the citizenry the truth. And, no, even if you use Trump, there was a chance to release the Kennedy assassination files last month.
Oh boy, here we go.
Yeah, here we go. And
didn't.
he said he was going to, but then he read some of them. And then he said, we can't do that. We can't release it. Well, what does that make everybody think?
Conspiracy.
That there's something to hide if you can't release it. Just by default, human nature will say, if you're not releasing it, then clearly there's something you don't want people to know.
It's been over 50 years. Clearly, yes.
Yes.
No, I'm just going to say quickly one thing on that. Just some of the people involved in there, I believe, are still alive, and or have family members that are alive. So I'm not saying it could quite easily be a conspiracy theory that they don't want people to find out about. But at the same time, it could just be the government trying to protect the privacy of some of the people involved in the John F. Kennedy cases.
John F. Kennedy's grandchild, I don't think is going to care. His grandpap had an affair with another woman.
Well, it's not like John F. Kennedy's gonna care nowadays, you know. He forgot all about it the day it happened, you know.
It's funny.
But, I mean,
Hits to the head and you just forget everything.
I mean, I guess kind of to play devil's advocate, like
Who are you
just,
going to play devil's advocate with?
well,
My side?
well, I guess like to see the other side of like
The other
in this
side of
case
what?
Trump hiding not hiding but like restricting some of the files. In that sense, it might be argued that it could be to protect like the stability of America, because for obviously if something really big gets released, then you're gonna start seeing maybe calls to actions and a little bit of anarchy here and there. You get the point. And like in that sense, you have to wonder like, when is it more important to so say not protect, but maintain like the balance of the system? Because for example, in 1896, right, the election, some could argue that if the big businesses, corporations, whatsoever, were to come crashing down, then well, who's to say the rest of the economy would come crashing down later? Which it kind of did, to say the least. But
Well, yeah, we'll get into that when
Yeah.
we get into it. But what
Yeah.
you're really asking is, they're the gatekeeper, and you need somebody to be the gatekeeper for the truth, and maybe the unfettered truth. Even if it hurts at times, you said it might hurt. The truth's painful at times. And do you need a gatekeeper to sort of make sure for our own security, whether it's national security or stability, like you said, that certain things are kept secret from us? And to what extent will most Americans accept that as normal? And the part that makes me a little different, I think, probably in this, maybe even within this podcast, is I want to know everything. And I don't want the government to think they deserve to know better than since we are the government in the context of the republic. It is a messy world. It's probably a pretty messy universe, you know? But I still want to know what those things are in my mind, to move humanity forward. I don't like sheltering us or humanity from the truth in any way. Especially if we know some things, whether it's scientific or any knowledge that we have. I would love for that to be shared with the people. But you're right, there might be a ripple effect, you know? So I don't have a solution to that problem. It makes me almost want to be part of the group that gets to decide that. I don't know about you guys, but it makes me want to be in the know more. That's where I get motivated.
I'd say like this issue is like more of an America versus American issue. Like, should the like national security of America be worth like, say, NSA, the privacy of the Americans? Like, should we care about us as a nation or us as the people?
Well, that goes back to just basic individual versus community. I mean, if
Federal versus state.
no, I mean, like if everybody is special and whatnot, right? Like it's that sort of idea, but nonetheless, there's still a big discussion of like what's progress, I guess. Like what would be better is
Well,
like
let's look at some of the most recent examples, and I think we talked about it in class with the idea of NSA, like you brought up, and then Snowden entering that equation after James Clapper lied under oath in testimony before the House of Representatives. And the House of Representatives, the closest governmental body to the people elect those folks every 2 years, right? And we, the people, kind of wanted to know if the NSA was spying on all citizens. And James Clapper told them, no, we're not doing that. We're not collecting everybody's records, and we're not doing that. It would be illegal for us to do that. And Snowden decided at that point to actually tell all of us the truth. But he had to tell us the truth by becoming a non-citizen, basically, and being on a list, and going to Hong Kong first, and then seeking asylum in Russia after. And the irony in all that is, he's an American trying to tell you the truth that went to the land of freedom in Russia to be able to do it. And that's weird. Doesn't that sound weird?
Russia, the land of freedom.
I know.
Yeah.
It's ironic, and this discussion should be had outside of a high school class. I agree with you. It should happen outside of a podcast that we voluntarily put together. But have you seen this discussion ever happen in any other circles other than here?
A little bit.
A little bit here?
Between friends, you know,
Yeah,
it's like
between-
mostly friends, not ones of like any, actually one time, once or twice with like relatives. Other than that, like close relatives, no.
But Justin's right. People want to watch the dog videos. And what else did you say?
Cat.
Like Trump getting 2 scoops of ice
2
cream.
scoops of ice cream. Yes, that's very important. Or Grover Cleveland having an illegitimate child. Or Bill Clinton having extramarital relations with Monica in the White House.
Or Trump lying about his weight or his height because otherwise he would be classified as obese.
Yes, or how many people were actually at his rally. Or
His inauguration.
right.
Whether or not he was actually disabled to not fight in the Vietnam War.
Or whether President Obama was an American citizen or not.
Or
Or
it's birth
Is he
certificate.
Muslim? Is he Kenyan? Oh,
yes, yes. Or can you guys think of anything else? I'm sure we could. We could sit
We
here
could go
all
on
day.
all day.
We could go
The
on
entire
all day.
episode of the podcast could be about the stuff on news
President's
that
crippled.
doesn't even need to be there.
What about President Trump's hair? I mean, that's really important.
Boy.
Yeah, that's it.
His hair is really critical.
We have to unite
His
as
toupee.
Americans.
His skin looks orange
But
too.
yeah, but have you heard
He's like
news
70
about
years old.
ex-family member, his daughter, his wife, all of that
Yes.
stuff? Wow.
He said he would be with his daughter if she wasn't his daughter. Yeah, that's fine.
It's like
You say it's
America's just like the Puritan America is just like always glorifying like all the inside bits of people's lives. Oh, or like, you know, extramarital sex. Oh no, oh no, no.
Oh,
Like, no.
it's not just Puritan. It's
Well, mostly because, you know,
European too.
yeah, well, you realize that America is mostly Puritan.
Whoa.
Mostly.
Well,
Whoa.
maybe before,
In like
but
the early founding of our country.
Now.
Okay.
Oh,
I don't know about
Ridiculous.
now.
All right, early founding of our country, you know, and those sorts of traditions stayed with America, and I'm saying for worse that they stayed with America.
Well, here, let me, hold on. Before we get to a more, I guess we'll discuss, I do have one question to ask about the whole media, I guess, distractor discussion. Do you think there's such a thing as positive distractors that do exist? For example, let's just say Trump donates to like a charity for special needs students or children. Do you think that's another example of a distractor?
Well, there's no need to glorify. I have a problem with words all day. There's no need to glorify someone's charity or like philanthropy. You know, there's no need to glorify any of it. All right, if you're doing it, if someone's actually like doing something that we consider good, just for publicity, they're not doing it for goodness sake. You
But
know?
how do you know if it's for publicity or if it's for actual good?
Well, if they want to be in the spotlight, you know, if they accept like rewards or something like that, you know, for doing good things, then usually that person, I wouldn't consider them like to be a good person if they voluntarily accepted the reward for anything, you know. Since it's like charity, well, I wouldn't really know unless I could delve into Donald Trump's mind. Hopefully, we could find a psychologist to help us. Hopefully, we can.
It's interesting that you brought that up because of the recent tax plan of Trump and company giving away bonuses for their employees, and you know now people are debating whether the purpose of those bonuses are of the big corporations. It's weird.
There's a lot. There's a lot to consider. And sometimes when I'm sitting on the outside and listening to you guys, at times you'll, and I think it's part of the product of our environment, will easily get off the main topic and spiral into a side issue that might be related some way, but is really not relevant to the issue. And how do we get it back into the narrative of essentially what's, I think, going to amount to a value judgment call that we're trying to make, whether that judgment calls on an individual, whether it's a president or even ourselves in our decision making, or the group, American citizens writ large, or whatever point of view we're trying to look at. But we sometimes deviate and we take those anecdotal stories and we turn them into something they're not. Or we turn them into something we want them to be, which might not be truthful. I think we were watching the clip from the news about the president's remarks regarding Haiti and African countries, right? Yes. And he says that in a meeting, which I think he thinks is private. You would have to take a leap of faith. Does he really mean that he doesn't like those people, or does he not like the conditions of those countries? I don't pretend to get in the psychology of his mind to figure that out. I would look at actions and deeds. And in the actions and deeds of one of the charitable contributions that he made was, I don't know how much money he donated, but Rand Paul, the politician, let everybody know that he donated or I'd say, I don't know, that's a good question, how much, but he sponsored a trip to Haiti to cure blindness. But he didn't publicize that, the president. But that's not part of the news story, even though the news knew that he would have done that if they do minimal research. But they don't know it because they're not going to do the research. And does that evidence provide balance that maybe he's not crazy racist? But if he's not crazy racist, then that doesn't help us in our ratings war that we're having with Fox News. You know? So you're trying to take a story out of context at times, which we know the press is doing.
And we gotta be really cautious that we're not gonna be a victim to that either, and jump to those conclusions. I mean, it really takes patience and really deep analysis before we jump to the conclusions on anything, really. But I think it's more apparent for all of us today that some of the reaction to the complexities of the issue are going to be, and choices people make are going to be uninformed choices, you know. So I don't have a solution for that, a comprehensive one. I think it's our dialogue here and continued dialogue.
Okay, well, we're about at an hour, so that's probably about how long these podcasts will typically be. So we're going to wrap it up. Anyone have any last words to say?
Last words to say.
Man, I sure hope that State of the Union is gonna be good.
Yeah, and I'm just going to encourage all of you. Make sure you watch the State of the Union. Don't, because if you just go on and watch, I don't know, like Jimmy Fallon, some comedian afterwards, or you watch like a news channel, that's a secondary source. You are losing a huge amount of what's happened, because watching the State of the Union directly, that's going to be primary source. You hear word for word. You get to make that judgment call. If you watch the news, there's someone else making all the judgment calls for you, filtering it out for you, when you should be doing that for yourself.
But remember the context behind State of the Union. Chances are it's gonna be scripted, script writers, whatnot. So don't take everything Trump says for, oh, that's what he thinks, that's what he says, and that's who I should take him to be.
Make sure you make those calls yourself, and I guess that's it for today. Make sure you guys come in next week if you enjoyed this, because we'll be talking about a whole bunch of
Thanks.
a whole bunch of things.